Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt, where we explore the science and practice of compassion and how it shows up in real human relationships. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Professor Douglas Smith, a colleague and friend through the Motivational Interviewing network of trainers. Doug is Professor of Social Work at the University of Illinois at Urbana, Champaign, and Director of the Center for Prevention, Research and Development. Doug's work sits right at the intersection of compassion, evidence-based practice, and real-world family complexity. For nearly 3 decades, his clinical and research work has focused on substance use prevention and treatment, particularly with adolescents, emerging adults, and families navigating significant challenges. He's a licensed clinical social worker, a long-standing member of the Motivational Interviewing network of trainers, and someone deeply committed to understanding not just whether interventions work, but how change actually unfolds in conversations. In this conversation, we'll be talking about Doug's book, Motivational Interviewing with Families, which brings together theory, practice, case examples, and a reimagining of how MI can support families as systems, not just individuals. And so I bring you Professor Doug Smith. Professor Doug Smith, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Congratulations on the book, Motivational Interviewing with Families, and published last June. I actually wondered, can we start with the idea of family work, I guess? Like, what is the
Sure.
therapeutic or the helping context that you have in mind in the book?
It's a great question. So I wrote the book with a goal in mind of it being broadly applicable to people that consider themselves proper family therapists, but also just people that have regular contact with family members through their practice. So as I was talking with my editor, they were thinking, there's probably a lot of people that would never consider themselves family therapists, but they do regularly interact with family members when they're treating clients. And so I wanted to have, very, very broad definition. So I think I define family work as anytime a clinician or a helper is coming into contact with family members on behalf of their clients.
Hmm. I guess it could be sort of couples, it might be sort of family members with their kids, it could be the children of older age clients that are coming along to sessions, sort of anything really it might count as family work.
Yes,
Mm,
all of the above.
right.
And in fact, I one of the later chapters, and I have examples of all of the above in the book. And we talk. One of the later chapters takes the later 2 chapters take kind of a lifespan approach, where we review a lot of the family-based studies that have been done with ranging with parents of young children all the way to older adults and their adult children. So a lot of different constellations.
So from the MI point of view, bringing MI to working with families, sometimes people hear MI and sort of feel like, well, that's what I already do, or, that sort of a thing. And they hear the 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 counselling skills that do underlie it, and we probably talk a bit about that in a sec. But there is an art to creating a kind of a direction in the conversation, I guess. And I imagine
Right.
that's kind of complicated with families because there would be multiple ideas and preferences and motivations and so on at play, and sometimes heading in different directions and that sort of thing. And so I can only imagine that the intentional, the directional aspect to MI, it takes a bit to kind of find that and kind of collaborate in such a way that we're sort of moving in a direction. Or what would you say about that in terms of family work?
I think you hit the nail on the head with using MI in a family context. One of the big problems is that when you're doing family work and there's multiple people in the room, you have to direct traffic.
Mm,
And so you have to think part of the problem, so motivational interviewing asks practitioners to listen deeply to their clients. And now, rather than listening deeply to just one person, I'm listening deeply to a family system. And I'm trying to think of multiple perspectives. I'm trying to think of multiple motivations. And I'm trying to guide that all towards some sort of productive work, whatever we might work on together. And so it is a little bit complicated. I think the part of the, my initial training as in my initial work in family therapy and some of the early experiences I had are kind of reflected in my writing, and that I've seen a lot of what I refer to as doing individual therapy while the family just happens to be sitting there as passive
Mm.
bystanders. So doing kind of like doing individual therapy with an audience, which I really wanted to impress upon people that that's not really leveraging the wisdom of the family in the best way. Like we really can gain a lot from family members' perspectives. um, and the reality is, unless you're a family therapist, you're seeing individual clients, and there might be specific reasons for bringing families in, but um, we our family members are people who are around us way more than clinicians ever will be. They know so much about us. They have different perspectives, and of course, they're going to see things differently and say different things. So it's a very interesting activity. But yes, it's tremendously complex to be thinking about using MI skills with family members.
I'm not sure whether this is a sort of a tough question for you or one to sort of throw at you, but what would it actually kind of look like? I mean, if you were to sort of imagine a family and what an interaction might sound like, is it sort of that the practitioner is sort of asking questions of that person and then reflecting to the other? Like, can you just, yeah, give us a play by play as to what it sounds like when MI is not just MI on the one person with other people watching, but it's a kind of a family based motivational interviewing session?
I didn't go so far as prescribing a number of interactions you had to have with each family. There's a couple of different ways you can think about this. How many times am I talking to both family members? How many speaking turns do I take with one individual? And I've got a couple of examples in the book that actually lay this out. Like I have a example. I've two different examples of basically the same couple, and they're coming to a clinician for mediation post. So this is a post divorce situation where they're trying to figure out arrangements for their children, which happens in a lot of countries. And in the first example, I kind of demonstrate what it's like to have all the conversation flowing through one person. And in the second one, and I put actually a graphic where you see how many specific turns did they take with each individual person. And so a couple of ways to do that, and a couple of the, talking about the techniques, but, quite simply, there's a couple of terms that I used in the book, like pivoting. I use the term pivoting to kind of explain this concept of you really have to be mindful of talking to one person and then pivoting to the other person, on a fairly regular basis, so that they're not just, sitting around and becoming disengaged.
Yes, it's interesting because in MI we often do frequency counts of things. We might sort of
Yeah,
count up how many open questions and how many reflections, and there's the question to reflection ratio sort of thing, or reflection to question ratio 2 to 1 or something like that. And then in a family sort of a setting, there might be this other kind of thing to keep an eye on, which is the turn taking or the
right.
pivoting, uh,
Yeah,
and exploring sort of both parties a little bit. And part of that might be exploring their own perspectives. Part of that might be each person responding to the other's perspective, I guess. But it becomes interesting when we start to think about behavior change and maybe even change talk, which we'll talk a little bit about later, perhaps. But the change talk would be when a person is talking about their own kind of motivations and kind of what they would like to
Right,
change or why or how and so
right,
on, rather than what I often find is each party starts to talk about what they'd like the other person to change and why and how and so on. And I'm guessing that's not quite the same as change talk. But so it's sort of juggling those kind of ideas.
Well, I think it depends. So it's an interesting thing to think about. If you're thinking at the family systems level, then we have this idea that change talk, when clients talk about their motivation to change, and it's yoked to a particular target behavior, something specific. When you get to family systems, a lot of time what you just mentioned really happens. It's like, I'd like them to change this, or I'd like them to change this, or their behavior is causing me to do this. It's affecting me in this way. uh, so I've been thinking about, how do is there a way to think about like a family level target behavior? Is there some broader, like, overarching family behavior? Like I do a lot of work in addictions, and so clearly the target behavior is usually reducing substance use, or mitigating the harm from substance use, those types of things. But if I bring a parent or um, a partner in, then the conversation often shifts to family functioning and how this is affecting family functioning. Now, in classic individual MI perspective, everything that the partner would say about family functioning would be subordinate to the goal of changing their substance use. Like, yes, oh, if they were to cut back on the booze, we'd have better communication. Things would be a lot better. We'd be happier. So then I guess the question is, do we think about family functioning or family communication as kind of like the top family goal, and then substance use as kind of a secondary change talk? So it's a little bit complicated, because what you have is you've got interlocking goals, essentially. You can't really separate, family functioning goal from the substance use goal. They're so interconnected. So it really is kind of which bucket do we want to put this under? And I tried in my writing to kind of think a little bit about this, and think about, should we be double counting some change talk? Should we be thinking of some change talk belonging to both someone's personal goal and also a broader family goal? So in that situation, like family, like a somebody that would be changing their substance use, that would be their that would essentially be kind of their individual target behavior. But if that also it paves the way to talk about, kind of in family work, if that paves the way to talk about this higher order goal of improving someone's family, then those are that would I would kind of put that as a family level target behavior, and I would think about whether any change talk statements belonged to both of those types of target behaviors. Hopefully that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it
That was
does
a
actually.
that was really the hardest chapter to write. That was
Yeah,
probably the chapter to write in the book, and I had to take a lot of creative liberties, because it's one where we don't really have we don't have a model for it. So
yeah.
I was really trying to think a lot about it.
Yes, it's sort of the novel contribution really of the book is this idea of how to kind of manage the different people, their different goals, their different motivations. It's interesting to think there is an individual or personal goal, perhaps for the maybe the person who's identified as your client, I guess, the person who perhaps is
Right.
working towards changing their drinking or something like that. There might also be personal change goals for the other family members as well. That there might be things that we explore that they're doing, perhaps that's sort of kind of creating difficulties or contributing to the maintenance of the behavior even, or perhaps there's certain boundaries that they could explore, setting or changing for themselves. And then there's the kind of family, the overarching focus for the family, and what together we might all change, or that's more at that family
Right.
level. And there might even be, yes, very very sort of reciprocal focuses as well. That this person might be changing something, and this person's changing kind of the opposite of that. But the two things that are maintaining and creating a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle or dynamic between the parties. I'm just sort of riffing off what you were saying and thinking out loud, but
Yeah.
there's multiple potential focuses really of any one conversation. Hmm.
Yeah, I think so. It was, and even as I was drawing out Venn diagrams, thinking about it, thinking about what words I wanted to use, I landed on family level change talk. I landed on multi-level change talk, which is uh, the kind of how I define that is if someone has a goal, like quitting drinking, let's just keep going with that example.
Hmm.
And that goal is both a personal goal and also contributes to the broader family goal of improved family relationships. Then it would kind of double count as change talk onto two different target behaviors. So that was kind of my thinking. And then I think, and then maybe there's things that people want to change that really don't kind of matter. Family. Then you've got to be careful about, like, how much time do I allocate to talking about um, someone's personal change talk that really doesn't map onto the broader family conversation, because that might be distracting and it might pull us back into this idea of doing individual MI in front of their family member.
Hmm. The MI practitioner really is the serene duck on the water with their legs going 10 to dozen under the surface. There's a lot to be listening out for, and I can imagine that those, the vibrant kind of energetic family session is somewhat exhausting too for the practitioner as they focus on all of these levels. But you emphasize reflective listening. Actually, you kind of reordered things a little bit here, which I thought was interesting. You have come up with
Acronym heresy, right?
acronym heresy. You've sort of changed it to RAWs, reflections, open questions, affirmations, and reflective summaries. How do you think the MI community or the MI trainers community is going to respond to your new acronym?
Well, hopefully, it's still playing itself out. When I was at the last network of trainers meeting, the last MIT meeting in Minneapolis, I had someone say, "Oh my gosh, I love that," and I was like, "Oh, thank God," because I felt like I was taking a leap with reordering things, and I was had a little bit of creative license to do that. Um, the main point, of course, I was trying to make is that if we have reflections as if we truly want MI to be very reflection heavy, which is kind of the quality assurance standards are using more reflections than questions. Why aren't we emphasizing that? Why do we start with questions in the acronym? That just seemed a little strange to me. And then the other thing is that people get confused about summaries, because when we're doing quality assurance, summaries are, even though it's an S, Uh, they're really we talk about them out of both sides of our mouth. They're summaries are summaries, but they're also reflections, you know. So it made sense to me to reorder and to do that.
Yeah, no, it made a lot of sense to me as well, because we
I
often
haven't
do.
had any hate mail. I haven't had any hate mail about it yet, so I'm glad about that.
Oh, well, sometimes
It's
that's a
still
shame.
early
Maybe
days. It's still early days, though.
could be could be fun. But no, it does make sense, that we're often in training trying to sort of if motivational interviewing were a car, then it reflections of the engine type thing, like there's these little ways that
Right.
we emphasize the importance of reflections in MI. Open questions are important and get things started, and affirmations kind of perhaps sweeten the deal a bit or something, but reflections of the engine type thing. So to put them up first, makes a lot of sense, really. When working with multiple people, because it sounds like in some ways that idea of raws really applies to motivational interviewing generally, but in terms of
Yeah.
working with families, what do reflections really allow us to do, or what do they kind of help with or achieve, that maybe, some of those other skills, the questions and affirmations and so on, maybe don't.
I think uh, reflections when you deliver them at the family level. And so the cool thing is that it doesn't really take much effort to direct a reflection to two people rather than one person. When I was writing, I found it remarkable. And when I was thinking about my own practice, I was like, of course, there's an easy way to train this. And I was thinking about training and I was thinking about my practice and what I've done with families and couples when I've seen them. And I was thinking, all we really need to do to a reflection to get to this goal of like monitoring the balance of time and making sure both people are talking, we can direct a reflection to multiple people by just adding a little clause of like, it sounds like all of you are feeling frustrated. It sounds like all of you are committed to doing this. Just by adding all of you, both of you, everyone in the room tonight, just a little bit of a minor variation to like a reflection stem, and all of a sudden you're opening a space for anyone in the room to talk rather than routing your conversation through just one person. So that I think is the benefit of reflections. The other thing is it gives you an opportunity to reflect on the commonalities. So the common ground, if there's a tremendous amount of conflict, you can really focus your reflection on what are these, conflicted, family members that are in conflict. What is their common purpose here? And we often talk about, sometimes one of the classic reflections or ways to think about people who are like, oh, I'm not happy about being here is, and yet you came. Why did you all come and agree to come here? What's in it for each of you, for being here in the room together to work through this? And that I think is where reflections and the open questions are really valuable, especially when they're addressed to multiple people at one time.
Mm. That's a really great takeaway, a little trick there of reflections that begin with you all or everyone here, or that it's kind of like a reflection of the various parties, but where the common ground lies. I can really sense that you all feel quite committed to do something to make life in the family better. And they're all coming at it maybe from different angles, or they have different roles to play, but that's the common ground, and you're able to use reflections to kind of bring that sense together. I wonder what about the good old double-sided reflections? Often in
Yeah.
double-sided reflections we might reflect the individual's ambivalence, I guess. On the one hand, you feel this, and on the other hand, you feel that, or and so on. Is there a kind of a way that double-sided reflections get used or changed or kind of applied in a family setting?
Wow, it's as if you're a Confederate. Like that's a great question. Thanks for that question because it really it's something that I labeled a family level double-sided reflection,
Love it.
and how it can be used is rather than in a individual level double-sided reflection, you're trying to highlight both sides of a person's ambivalence. But in a family level double-sided reflection, what you can do is you can highlight two different people's perspectives.
Mm.
So it sounds like you're feeling this way about this, and on the other hand, you're feeling this way about this. So where does that leave us? That kind of it is, and again, it's another strategy for communicating to both parties that you're listening to them both, that you're not taking sides, that you're really wanting to work with them as a unit. And that's one of the big problems with engagement in family work, is that usually somebody feels like they might be scapegoated, or someone might be a little bit less invested in it, or someone might feel that they're going to be the clinician is going to take sides with someone else, and they're going to be the focus of, everything's going to fall on them essentially.
I wonder whether there's another one which you may have come up with too, but it's almost like a triangular reflection where you reflect
Mm,
this person's perspective, you reflect this person's different perspective, and then you reflect the bit that is the common ground. That sort of is the third kind of aspect of the reflection. And I was thinking of that because in a double-sided reflection, we often choose which part of the ambivalence to put last. We might put the change talk
right,
last or something like that.
right.
And so putting the common ground last was just I don't know if triangular reflection is the right kind of term to use, but something like that.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about for the second edition. Just to hopefully, I'll hit you up in like 5 to 10 years with
Yes. Yeah.
come back to me for that. That's a really great thought, though. I love that. So that would be I could definitely see some use to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it just really speaks to the uh well to the importance and the helpfulness of reflections, that these are the sorts of things that reflections really do achieve that asking lots of questions might not. The other thing, of course, is that reflection of the different people might help the other people hear and understand each other as well, and so that you kind
Yeah.
of serving that purpose too. So the reflections seem to be very important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you mentioned, they're generally considered to be the engine of MI. And I was just teaching master's level social work students this week, and had a class. We were covering reflections and complex reflections this week, and we talked about what is it like to guide a session with primarily reflections. What are some of the challenges in doing that, and what are some of the benefits of doing that? And I think some of what we got are that questions, sometimes questions, I think, just have more potential for error
Mm,
in terms of miscommunication. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it this week as I was teaching. I was like, there's potential for a question to come off badly, or for a question to have a little bit too much of an assumption, or you know sometimes questions are actually suggestions. So we I do a fair bit of differentiating between reflections and questions, because my students sometimes say things like, have you thought about getting a job, to someone who's struggling financially? Or I'll see this in role plays with beginning clinicians. And of course, our client who's struggling financially has thought about how to better support them. They don't necessarily need that suggestion. They need, sometimes they just need a clinician that's going to validate them and build, someone that they trust to, troubleshoot and walk with them, and to, feel their pain and to understand their pain and their struggle. That's really what I love the your focus on compassion has always been refreshing. And I mentioned that with the new terminology and motivational interviewing about compassion caused me to go back to the dictionary and look at the Latin roots of compassion, and it literally means with pain, right? With someone, to be with someone's other with someone else's pain. So it's um, walking with them through those challenges.
Mm. Yeah, questions. They're important too, I suppose, but it's the reflections that create it really help to uh, build the spirit of MI, and
Right.
also just clarify understanding. Because in some ways, the danger of questions really kind of comes in when we assume that we know what they mean by their answer, and the answer comes, and unless we then offer a reflection or a complex reflection and kind of just make sure and kind of clarify if we need to or whatever, then we're left with an assumption that we know what their answer really means. And I suppose in family work, family members can make that sort of similar mistake too, that their partner says
Yeah.
something, and then there's all this history and other things have happened, and these layers of assumption that they know what the person's saying, and sometimes they're offended by it or whatever. But to use the reflections to really create greater understanding, and therefore greater helpfulness, as they say.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about that. If you make it as a humble hypothesis, and I think there's that rush that a lot of motivational interviewing is about avoiding that rush to diagnose and to prescribe. These are some of the words that we try to avoid, or that are they're a little antithetical to motivational interviewing. Though, if you think about some of the words we commonly use, collaborate and accept and demonstrate compassion and partner with, we really are trying to make humble hypotheses through reflections, and to and if we're wrong, we self-correct, and our clients will tell us, no, it's not necessarily that. I don't think of it that way, but I think of it this way. And then you've opened up communication. You're talking about something in a different way.
Hmm. The thing that's still sort of there in my mind, I think, is just the notion that um, the different members of the family will have in mind different focuses, different pathways, different outcomes, and how to manage that. I suppose you mentioned in your book sort of like faux autonomy, where you sort of you sort of uh, respecting choices, and kind of being collaborative and so on, to get them to do what you want, or to get them to make the change. It's a kind of a
Right.
where, as opposed to yeah, how do you offer that genuine respect and autonomy support and so on for families' choices, and then the individuals in the families' choices, and sort of staying compassionate, staying collaborative, as you say, but
Mm.
just when family members might want different things.
It's a really good question. And uh, sometimes family members do want different things. Sometimes they seek counseling and they dissolve, or they become estranged. And I think that's the messiness of working with people, right? It's like we as clinicians can't make everything better for our clients. And I think the point about showing compassion for people, and you asked about autonomy, like how do we respect autonomy when things go poorly? I think it requires a lot of acceptance on the part of clinician about just how much control we have over outcomes and just how much we can actually do on this person's journey. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things in my training was how do you not take it personally when things go badly? And how do you maintain that composure when family members aren't doing what you want? That's a challenge to showing autonomy because there's a tendency to kind of go into "I told you so" thinking, or like it just reinforces your idea that if only they would do this, things would be better. But at the end of the day, I can't control that as a clinician. I can be genuine with my clients. I can offer them, um, you know, if I get the privilege of entering someone's family system and they share with me, the messiness of their family and things don't go well, I have to accept that something happened. And hopefully it was a planting seeds moment. Hopefully maybe I wasn't the last stop on their journey, but I think um, this is why I stress when we're kind of I think this definitely comes up when if we prematurely end our relationship with family members and things aren't going well. I talk about ending on empathy, and kind of this idea of uh, it happens. Not family work doesn't always end on a positive note. And what we need to do to kind of plant that seed is to make sure that we're still being empathic to their situation, still there with their feelings and acknowledging their frustrations that things didn't go well. Um, because it's rough, and I think it's rough on clinicians emotionally too.
And just listening to you there, I sort of you sort of reminded me really that in some ways this is the point, actually, is that families are there because they have different perspectives and different views of where to from here, and in a sense the genuine autonomy support, the accurate empathy, the using reflective listening at a family level and individual level, and all that sort of stuff is all designed to help with that. Sometimes it might not go well, as you
Right.
say, and then we're sort of managing our own feelings and responses to that, and our own frustrations and so on. But often applying the motivational interviewing approach and sort of listening well is the very thing that helps to find or helps families find their way through those tricky sort of dynamics amongst them. And
You
in a
know,
sense, that's the hopefulness of your book and the approach and bringing that approach to families is to help them through those tricky bits. What is family level equipoise?
this actually goes back to the idea that kind of the balance of we talked a little bit earlier about the balance of talking to two or more people in the room, that we have to divide our attention between multiple people. We also can't. I think one of the pat myself on the back moment was when I wrote something. I wrote a sentence, and I know you're a writer, and occasionally you're like, oh my gosh, that's it. I like how I wrote that. One of the things that I really liked in the book, writing, and I still reflect on it, is you can't have one person's affirmation be another person's confrontation. You you just simply can't. If you've got a family in conflict, and I think it's particularly tricky with affirmations.
Yeah.
If you have a family in conflict and one person doesn't see any problem with their behavior, and you've got a clinician that's trying to build rapport with them, let's say in front of a family member they're in conflict with, if you're pouring on affirmations to this family member, then the other family member jumps in and is ready to fight. It's like, I don't see it this way. You're discounting my perspective. So the idea of family level equipoise is really thinking about that family dynamic and thinking about that perspective and really being mindful of um, evenly applying the motivational interviewing spirit to everybody that's in the room.
Yes, we're really wanting to avoid sort of the leaning one way or another, or kind of having alliances accidentally even or unwittingly
Of course.
with different
Yeah.
family members, and trying to be equally poised, I suppose, across the different across the different people in the family and across the different parts that each of them perhaps also have. For some reason,
Right.
and I'm not an internal family systems person, but I keep thinking about how in MI we're sort of working with an internal family system, and
Right.
in family work we're working with a family system, I suppose, and it's sort of,
Right.
so we're trying to always have the different people and the different parts, in equipoise, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, part of why I coined that too is I'm trying to encourage people with some MI background to integrate more family work into their practices if they're primarily focused on individuals. And so I think the MI community, the folks in the MI community that read the book, I hope that they kind of get that point. I use the word equipoise specifically because it's something that they're familiar with regards to change talk. But I switched it up and am referring to equipoise in regards to the family system.
Mm.
And I did that if you think about it, I did that with a couple of different terms.
Yeah.
The family sided double reflection is not reflecting both sides of the ambivalence. It's reflecting two or more perspectives
Yes.
of different family members. So it really, I was hoping that that would help make some connections for people in the MI community to expand their practice and do a little bit more family work, or help them be a little bit more comfortable doing that.
Yeah, expand was the word that was in my mind too. That in a sense it expands MI to the family, but it also expands particular parts of MI to sort of apply in a family kind of a setting. Which brings me to change talk, and so in the context of family work, what are we? How are you really thinking about change talk there, and what does it sound like if we're hearing it from the different parties? Are there things that we're sort of watching out for there in terms of is sort of noticing and reflecting the change talk side of things?
I think this is where you can really, this is exactly why I think some individual practitioners should consider working with family members, because you have the potential to generate and clarify goals of multiple people at once. And so, there are some scenarios where I think I talked earlier about like interlocking goals,
Mm.
improving family communication and reducing drinking. And, um, there are just some situations where during the course of the conversation, two people might have ideas of, different things that they could change to solve a problem, and then you're generating kind of two different people's motivation, but you're also learning about them as people, and you're also learning about what they want. And so you're actually identifying other goals. So sometimes it's kind of like this idea that we've had in cognitive behavioral therapy for decades, that small changes lead to bigger changes, that sometimes there's this cascading of changes. Well, if you're working with families, and if you're kind of generating change talk about different goals, I think sometimes that has a great possibility to cascade. One of the examples in the book that I talk about is a child truancy example, and like parents are school social work is called in to talk to two parents about getting their kid to school on time. The kid's actually not there, but we could have had the kid in the room too to kind of talk about this. Again, going back to this idea that that's family work, right? It's a situation where it's not family therapy proper necessarily, but you're asked to work with family members um, on a specific problem. A kid's not getting to school on time, but you can do it in a way where you really have a big impact on the parents too, rather than just solving this problem of like, getting the kid to school on time. I've got some sample dialogue about how, yeah, one of the case examples has some sample dialogue about when they're generating change talk. The mom is thinking about switching jobs, and because that's a contributing factor to the child not getting to school on time, and so the conversation kind of veers to that, that what that would look like for mom. And so, we can have these relatively short MI conversations with families that even if they're designed for one purpose, they can kind of have an impact on a broader family system.
Hmm. Yes, it's really sort of listening out for change talk in a very open-hearted, open-minded way, I suppose, and depending on the comments and the things that people sort of say or the things that you notice. A little question that popped to mind out of that example, though, is the other thing about family work or inviting families into individual work is that there'll be a key character who's not at the session. And you're working with a young person's drinking and their mum comes, but the dad's not there, or like your example where the
Right.
actual child themselves isn't there. And it just suddenly made me think, how do you deal with that? Do you just stick with the voices in the room? Do you use really complex reflections to start to kind of bring the voice in a way of that missing person into the room? Or you like is what are your thoughts about that little curiosity?
Yeah, I have a whole chapter on engaging,
Yes.
and I think, and that's a big kind of subtopic in that chapter, and I've seen clinicians, and actually there are entire studies, motivational interviewing studies, where I think as soon as the client says, no, I don't want to bring my family member into this uh, venture, which was the case in Project Match, the largest U.S. study on alcoholism. They gave people people with alcoholism the option of bringing their significant other into the session, and it was a really, and if they said no, they were like done. They didn't do anything else. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of curious, right? So we're kind of erring on the side of autonomy, like when the client. So that's one situation. The client objects to an important person being in the room, and so there's a way of having a whole motivational interviewing conversation about that. Where you're generating change talk about that as a potential target behavior, as a potential benefit. So that was something that I was thinking about for kind of getting the, if you're starting with one client and you're trying to expand to other family members, that's one way of doing it, is working with through who's there, in terms of like them giving their blessing for the other person if they don't want them there.
Mm.
So that's a scenario that you run into. If you run into a scenario that you were talking about where one person doesn't want to come, that may prompt a motivational call with that specific person, to talk about what it might look like, or to address their in using a motivational interviewing style, talk about what their concerns are about joining the session, and again, thinking about eliciting potential change talk, and hearing their concerns about potentially coming to the family meetings.
You mentioned engagement and the chapter that sort of focuses a bit on that, and I think there's another little phrase there, superfluous engagement trap or something. I think what it is speaking to is knowing when the time is right to move from a focus on engagement and helping the person feel heard and understood, or the multiple people, and perhaps moving on to being to evoking change talk, and ultimately perhaps even planning. And I imagine that is a very tricky little balancing act there, because there will be different people at different stages of that conversation maybe too, and how to know when the family is kind of ready for, direction and planning, I suppose, and so on.
Right.
What are your thoughts there?
So, yeah, I coined another term, right? Another
Yep.
trap. Add another trap. You know why this is? This is so my when I was struggling with a little bit of writer's block, my editor uh, called on Bill Miller to deliver an intervention,
Really?
and and they met with me. they, they said, Doug, what's going on? Like, why are you behind schedule on writing? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't like, and some of the things that they said to me, they had an MI conversation with me about writer's block, and it was brilliant actually. But one of the things I remember from that conversation is, we want you to write the book that you were supposed to write. It was just a beautiful like example of like, we want it to be in your voice. We want it to be and I think I was kind of in a little bit of a block about what I wanted to say, and them in retrospect, them giving me that license to be a little bit creative or to think about this um, was really refreshing, and really helped me get to the finish line with writing the book. But the superfluous engagement trap is just lingering too long on the why, right? Lingering too long on the motivation. Why are we here? Lingering too long on rapport building. And so, I've had, various family members that have sought counseling over the years, and they've told me like, they're nice, but we don't really do anything. So I guess there comes a point where it's like, you know, and I think this is a problem. I guess I was trying to send a little bit of a message to the MI community that we've we've aired, we maybe spend a little bit too much thinking about maybe we have a tendency to lean too long into rapport, and it is really a timing thing, and it's something that we've got to be careful about. But I wonder if we need to have a somewhere between kind of a premature focus trap and a superfluous engagement trap, is this middle ground of like, we're clicking, and we've kind of identified that we can work together, that we've got a little bit of a trusting relationship, um, and that the family's invited the clinician on their problem solving journey. And now, what is it that we're going to do together to solve these problems? Sometimes there needs to be a little substance to that, and a little bit of uh, other expertise and suggestions. And I just wonder if people in the MI community are getting a little too worried about providing their clinical expertise, or like talking about potential paths that we might take.
Yes, in individual MI, there's sort of a moment of engagement where we sort of feel, okay, perhaps the person is engaged now, and then there's a kind of a moment of agreed focus or something. And okay, good. That's sort of, now let's move into evoking, and then we start to build a sense of the person's motivation, and okay, now that's let's move in like it, and it's really important and skillful. MI is about being able to bring awareness to the shifts as we move
Mm.
along, and obviously shift back into engagement if something goes awry or there's a rupture or something
Right.
like that. But and it just sort of, yes, it's kind of with multiple people in the room and families and so on. It's a very skillful thing to be able to not get too caught in the engagement only, but also to not necessarily jump to planning, I presume, before
Right.
people are also. So there's an art to it in a way.
Yeah, so you're making me think of something that I did a while ago. So one of my research mentors, he developed a, a substance use, a comprehensive substance use and mental health assessment. And uh, what they did was they would give somebody like a 30 or 40-minute assessment, and then based on their answers, they would generate a report for clinicians to guide kind of a referral session with them. And I built a MI module for them. And so one of the ways this worked is that you know, uh, a person taking this assessment would list, they had kind of some forced choice options and why. They had a question on how ready are you to change, or how important is it for you to make changes in this area. And they also had kind of like some checkbox lists of, what are some of your reasons for wanting to make this change. But it was a structured assessment. And so they would do the structured assessment first, and then the clinician would use this, this kind of auto-generated report to try to and talk through it and talk through with them, you know, kind of what the client wanted to do. So we had this issue with like, oh, what if someone endorses a ton of different reasons? You're looking at those reasons and you're like, and you're thinking, uh, okay, it doesn't seem to make sense for me now in an open-ended question to kind of go back and drudge through all your motivation and like kind of like ask you again in kind of like an open-ended kind of free-flowing clinical thing. But so what we kind of landed on was with people that endorsed a lot of reasons, why not start with, wow, you mentioned a lot of different reasons on your assessment for changing, like this and this and this and this. Tell me a little bit more about that. It seems like you're kind of motivated to do this. It was, and maybe that means we should focus our time more on talking through next steps. So it was kind of like and if you think about this well, at least in the American healthcare system, there's so much pressure and time that it's hard to do MI in some contexts. So this was kind of this was a kind of a solution to that compressed time problem. And what um, what I liked about that approach, your question was, how do we know if we're lingering too long? It's like you wouldn't start at evocation from ground zero when you already have this rich assessment data that someone's got all these. Maybe the conversation needs to start in a different place
Hmm.
about, and I called it consolidating commitment. Maybe when we have a lot of reasons endorsed, the focus should be on consolidating commitment and still doing the MI thing and like reinforcing all the reasons that they said on their assessment, but maybe not belaboring it. And this kind of goes back to some of the things that I think Bill Miller's been talking about recently. Is like MIs for people who are ambivalent, right? Like the change talk and the full model are really about kind of resolving some resolution of ambivalence. And if people are coming to us with some pretty decent motivation, the engagement pace could possibly move a little bit quicker.
Hmm. You sort of, I guess, mentioning too there the RS of RAWs, which is the reflective summary, that if you're hearing
Yeah.
these reasons, and there's several reasons, it's not necessary at that stage maybe to ask what are your reasons, but it might be really great to do a reflective summary of those reasons and just to package them up
Right.
and offer them back, and then yeah, like I loved what you said there. Like what given those reasons, like what might be the next step for you, sort of thing. It might be very timely to go to planning and ultimately commitment and that sort of thing.
That's essentially what we had. We essentially had a change talk summary built
Yeah,
into an auto-generated report. And for we were assuming an environment where there's remarkable turnover, younger workforce that doesn't, some of the not-for-profits, uh, some of the in the U.S. healthcare system and in the substance use system specifically, we have had situations where it's a young, mobile workforce that turns over a lot. So this was one way of addressing that workforce training need.
the 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 last of your um, little phrases, which I loved, was motivational send-offs, I guess. And you did actually
Ah,
mention earlier about, the endings too are really important and how we manage those. You quoted Shakespeare, "Parting is such a sweet sorrow," which I thought was very good. Always good to quote Shakespeare, but yeah, well, drawing on your own experience and some of the theory that you've presented there in the book, what does it mean to end work with families in a way that still really reinforces, I guess, the MI spirit and so on?
one of the key points when I was thinking about motivational send-offs is we never know when this relationship with families is going to end. Families don't come back. They choose not to come back to us. And so I think it's imperative on us to think about at the end of our sessions with clients, what, you know, what can I say to wrap this session up on a positive note, not knowing if they're ever going to come back and see me again. And so that was kind of the perspective that I was thinking. There's and in my field uh, in my field, there's a lot of premature exits from clients choose not to come back, sometimes with no explanation. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that and to leave them with the best, most warmest atmosphere. The idea is just to, we talk about the atmosphere of compassion and empathy in motivational interviewing. And so I think, and a really important place for that is at the end of every family session that we have, because we don't know if it's going to be our last.
Love it. And hope too, I suppose. Bill Miller, as you know, is really well. I've had him on the channel, and he's talked about his latest book on hope, and yes, every session leaving with feeling the compassion and sensing that empathy and a sense of hope, I guess, too, in terms of the what next.
Yeah.
So, thank you for giving us a rundown of all of that. It left me with lots to think about because, to be honest, throughout our conversation today, I'm reflecting on lots of clients who ultimately I might see a family member or a couple of family members, and then also others for whom I think, well, actually maybe that's a good idea, to sort of incorporate that. You were humble in the book about, for example, the research and the evidence and so on. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
there, I guess, just to finish off, in terms of like what excites you maybe about the future of MI with families clinically, but maybe also in the research, like where do you think we go with all of that?
Well, I'm hoping to contribute in that area. I've got a study going on in Brazil right now where I'm starting to test out some of the ideas in the book. book with one of my Brazilian Minty colleagues and my former PhD students. So we don't know if some of these ideas that I've presented on family change talk work. I'd love to see a broader kind of perspective on how we count change talk in families and thinking about change a little bit more broadly than just a single target behavior, but thinking about how change talk be able to um, might be able to predict multiple change behaviors within the same family unit. So that I think is a really exciting idea, right?
Mm.
If we
Mm.
can improve the quality of life of multiple people with a single MI session, that would be really exciting.
What a fascinating idea. Yes. I mean, it's what I really appreciate in the book is that you've expanded our thinking about MI. You know, the like we said before, the expanding it to apply to multiple people. And yes, imagine if it was to have positive outcomes for multiple people in that one or those few sessions, but also expanded our ideas about some of the well loved and well known sort of strategies or skills or and so on, and even introduced us to a few new terms, which is good. So, Professor Doug Smith, I really appreciate you speaking with me on compassion in a t-shirt.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.